As the sun rose on Sunday morning, Hermione woke to Draco slowly sliding her underwear down her thighs and lapping at her, warming her from the inside out. Still half asleep, she let him turn her to the side, and she moaned as he slid into her from behind. Pulling one of her legs up and over his hip, cradling her head on his bicep, his fingers found her clit, and he played with her slowly and sensually until she came, still half dreaming. Her mind focused only the feel of his body wrapped around hers. Draco squeezed her to himself almost too tightly as he came just after her, and Hermione breathed slow and deep, feeling nothing but relaxed and contented. Immediately falling back into a doze, she vaguely registered Draco getting dressed and letting her know he was going to go for a run with Chico, since you clearly want to stay with Scorpius and have a lion. She acquiesced, telling him to leave the bedroom doors open so I can hear Scorp, and where in Merlin's name did my pants go? Scorpius joined her in the bed to snuggle a while after Draco left, and by the time she woke fully an hour or so later, the sun had risen high in the sky. She sat up and stretched, feeling more rested than she could ever remember, breathing in the aroma of bacon and coffee that was wafting up to her from downstairs. The rest of the day passed as if it were a dream. So ensconced was she in Draco and Scorpius's familial bubble. They had breakfast in their jammies, second and third cups of coffee on the back porch, while Scorpius played with Chico, and spent the afternoon wandering around the local farmer's market, yet another item on her to check off her list. By the end of the day, Hermione didn't want to leave, but felt it was best for her to head home and let the boys get ready for the coming week. Scorpius was happily playing in the living room with the film running in the background, so Draco joined her upstairs while she packed the few things she'd brought over into her duffel. "Do you think we should, talk?" Hermione inquired timidly. She felt the weight of how complicated things may be the closer she got to Scorpius, and didn't want to overstep any boundaries. She plopped onto the edge of the bed, and Draco shut the door with a soft click before turning towards her, scrubbing a hand over his face in apprehension. "You mean about yesterday with Scorpius?" "Yeah. Or, I don't know. About us, maybe?" Hermione shrugged her shoulders, also feeling apprehensive about where this conversation may lead. Would he suggest they slow things down between them? Draco sat on the bed beside her and placed a hand on her thigh, rubbing it absent-mindedly. "To be honest, I'm afraid if we have this conversation, I'm going to scare you away." Draco grimaced and chuckled awkwardly, looking down at the floor. "I don't think much could scare me away at this point, Draco," she admitted quietly. "Even if I said that, after spending one weekend with you, I never want you to leave?" Draco asked in a hoarse whisper, looking up to meet her gaze. Hermione's eyes widened in surprise, and she swallowed thickly, completely caught off guard. A long silence stretched between them as Hermione tried to collect her thoughts, and Draco waited patiently, his eyes watching her every move. "Well, to start, I'd say you're a bit crazy because it's only been like 8 weeks since we ran into each other. But I'm also—" Hermione cleared her throat, stalling, trying to gather the courage to lay her heart out for him, just as he had for her. It doesn't scare me. I feel the same, Draco, completely. But you're not worried we're moving a little fast with Scorpius and everything?" Draco barely let her finish her sentence before he grabbed the back of her neck and drew her to him, kissing her eagerly. Smiling widely against her lips, he pulled back after a moment and ran his hands down her neck, stroking his thumbs along her jaw, their noses almost brushing. "No, I'm not worried about Scorpius, and I'm not worried about the timing. In theory, it seems fast, yes, but if we both feel the same, and neither of us wants to slow down, then why should we? This feels so right to me, Hermione. Having you here with us this weekend has felt like a dream," he professed adamantly, earnestly. "Do you feel the same? Does it feel too fast for you?" Hermione shook her head and bit her lip, fighting the smile that threatened to break out across her face. No, I wouldn't change anything about the time we've spent together. I just don't want to cross any lines with Scorpius. I don't want to do or say anything wrong or make him confused or—" Draco held up a hand to stop her. "That, right there, is why I'm not worried about it, Hermione. I can see how you care for Scorpius and how important it is to you that you treat us both with respect. If something comes up, then we'll talk about it, but there's no need to worry about the preemptive." I'm very close with my son, and I'm fine with him knowing that you're someone special to me. Draco tucked a curl behind her ear and watched as she wrung her hands together, trying to figure out what was bouncing around in her brain. But what if... Hermione huffed a breath and jumped up, pacing back and forth. What if this doesn't work out between us? Won't that be too hard on Scorpius, after having me around? The words all rushed from her in one breath, and she breathed in jaggedly. Draco stood and steered her over to the window seat, forcing her to sit down beside him. He kept his hands around hers and rubbed his thumbs against her knuckles soothingly. We agreed, no games, right? He said softly. Right, she agreed. So tell me this. Does this seem like just an infatuation or a fling to you? Does this seem like something you'll grow bored of in a few months? Do we seem incompatible in the long run? Or does this feel like a rebound relationship for you? Hermione breathed deeply and closed her eyes, pushing the breath out slowly from her open lips. She felt close to tears when she opened her eyes to see Draco watching her kindly, as though he already knew what she was going to say. No, it doesn't feel like any of those things to me, she whispered. Draco wiped away the one tear that grazed down her cheek. Nor for me, my love. So let's take one day at a time, and just do what's right for us. And like Scorpius gave away yesterday, the twerp, I will continue to check in with him each time you come over, and we can let him lead how often we see you. Does that sound good? Hermione nodded and easily curled into his chest when he pulled her to him, breathing in the scent that was uniquely Draco, wondering what she'd ever done to deserve this wonderful man's heart. The couple headed back down the stairs, and Hermione said her goodbyes, a bear hug from Scorpius, and a chaste kiss on the lips from Draco, and popped back to the front stoop of her cottage just as the sun began to set behind the purple, heather-covered hills. She sighed deeply when she entered the cottage, already missing her boys. Monday, November 4th. Hermione. Hey, they just got an owl from my editor. She wants to meet me in Diagon Alley this afternoon. I think I'm going to stay in London for a few days and catch up with some friends while I'm there. Draco. Are you sure? Can't tempt you to be back tomorrow, can I? Wink. Hermione. LOL. I think it will be good for me to be back at my apartment for a bit, but I'll let you know if I change my mind. Draco. Okay, dinner at my place on Thursday? Hermione. Perfect. Hermione strolled through Diagon Alley with a spring in her step. Chico trotted happily at her side. It had been a long time since she'd set foot in the alley, and it felt nice to visit. She felt confident and at ease in one of her favorite fall outfits, sleek black denims, a soft cashmere sweater, her classic trench, and her go-to ankle booties. She spent an hour or so window shopping and chatting with friends that she saw along the way, killing time until she was due to meet Ginny for drinks at the Leaky. It was impossible not to think about the last time she'd visited the alley and the stark contrast of how miserable she had been at the time compared to now. Pregnant and at a loss of what to do about her marriage, gaunt and sick with stress, trapped in a sea of dead ends, what was supposed to be a simple errand to the alley for some potion ingredients had turned into a near panic attack, and she had spent the entire time ducking in and out of the doorways with the hood of her cloak pulled low over her face. She could remember the feeling as though it were yesterday. Fragile, small, and vulnerable, as though her insides were on display for everyone to see. Now, Hermione stood tall with a smile on her face, feeling beautiful and at peace with herself. For so long, she thought that if she allowed herself to grieve her losses, they would consume her, or that grieving might mean forgetting. But now that she had spent some time digging into those dark recesses of her spirit, she could see that grieving did not mean losing herself, or losing her memories. It just meant that she could begin to accept everything that had come to pass and start to let it go. She enjoyed taking the time to wander the street, and when someone approached her with the camera asking if they could take a photo with her, Hermione surprised herself by happily acquiescing, her smile genuine and wide. The lunch meeting with her editor had gone swimmingly, and they were already talking about a possible book tour for the following spring or summer, depending on how quickly she could finish her novel. Hermione had been unsure of what her editor would think of this new series she was beginning, as the tone of the novel was a bit different than how she normally wrote. The heroine was less confident, fearful even, and there was a much greater focus on the romance of the tale in her other books. To her surprise, her editor had loved it. Despite the meeting's success, Hermione was still a bit unsure about how she felt about the change of direction. Upon entering the Leaky, Hermione was besieged with the nostalgic aroma of beef stew and butterbeer. the pub filled with sounds of clinking glasses and the chatter of the early bird crowd. She chose a booth towards the back, where she could watch the rest of the establishment while waiting for Ginny to arrive. It wasn't long before the redhead appeared in a whirlwind of energy, sweeping Hermione into a bear hug and placing her order, shooting her with rapid-fire questions and small talk. In the months precluding her trip to the Cotswolds, Hermione had found Ginny's presence to be nearly unbearable, but now, after some time away, she realized how much she had missed her longtime friend turned sister-in-law. They talked for hours, right through the dinner rush and into the late evening, sharing all of their favorite dishes and finishing the evening with several rounds of Irish coffee. Ginny asked all the right questions, and Hermione enjoyed gushing about her new man, although his identity remained a secret. They talked about Hermione's boss bitch list and about Chico, who was happily hanging out under the table catching scraps, and Ginny caught her up on all of the family gossip she had missed the last several months. They didn't speak of the miscarriage, hadn't ever spoken about it actually, but while they said their goodbyes, Ginny's arms lingered around her in a tight embrace, and she made her feelings known, her voice choked up and raw. "I'm so glad you're doing well, Hermione, and take care of yourself, and you'll always be my sister." And then she was gone, spinning away through the flu. Slightly tipsy, but feeling light-hearted overall, Hermione made her way out into the Muggle London. Her heart felt full, and she was ready to face what she had been avoiding all day, that dreaded flat she'd shared with Ron. Hermione unlocked her apartment and had to push on the door with a hard shove, the warped wood causing it to stick to the door frame. It creaked open loudly, and Chico rushed past her and into the cold, uninviting space ahead of her, stirring up a bunch of dust from the carpets. Hermione followed Chico inside and struggled to get the door pushed back into the frame and locked again. She clicked the lights on and walked through the space in a daze, the stench of the past lingering in the air. Hermione pressed a hand against her heart, trying to ease the deep ache that had descended upon her the moment she crossed the threshold. All at once, her idea to stay a few days seemed ludicrous. In fact, keeping the apartment at all had been ludicrous. As though a lightning bolt had struck her, Hermione realized how silly it was to hold on to this apartment just because she didn't want to forget the baby she'd lost. Staying stuck in the past was no longer an option. Stripping off her nice clothes and slinging on some leggings and an old tee, Hermione got to work. It was time to get rid of this place once and for all. Wednesday, November 6th. By Wednesday morning, Hermione had packed up any belongings she intended to keep. Although that wasn't much beyond her clothing, her books, and a few keepsakes, everything had been sent over to her vault at Gringotts for safekeeping until after the holidays, when she presumed she would be looking for a new place. The rest of the flat's contents went either to charity or to the dump. Nothing she had ever shared with Ron would be kept. Hermione met with a realtor, penned a quick note to Ginny, and sent a text to Draco to let them both know about her decision before heading over to the Leaky to use the Floo. Draco was quick to text back, congratulatory about her decision to sell the flat, and more than enthusiastic that she was coming back to him a day earlier than planned. "Draco, I'm taking the rest of the afternoon off. Get your ass over here and we can celebrate properly. Wink. Hermione, I'm on my way. Kiss." Saturday, November 9th. The rest of the week passed in a happy haze of stolen moments with Draco, morning runs with Chico, and hours spent on her laptop digging into the middle portion of her novel. Saturday evening, Hermione popped over to Draco's just in time for dinner with a bottle of wine in hand, only to be surprised by the presence of Lucius Malfoy, who was reading a book with Scorpius on the couch. Hermione stopped in her tracks and just stood there a bit stunned as Scorpius jumped up to greet her, wrapping himself around her legs. She immediately felt underdressed in her old ripped denims and a slouchy sweater. Lucius who was obviously never caught looking anything less than regal, was in full wizard's regalia. Despite being unsure of what to expect when it came to interacting with Draco's father, she was pleasantly surprised when Lucius stood up to shake her hand. "Scorpius, is that any way to formally greet someone?" he asked dryly, but Scorpius simply shrugged and ran through the kitchen and into the backyard, where Chico was busy playing. That child and his manners. Lucius shook his head affectionately. "Welcome, Miss Granger. Thank you for this," he said as he took the wine she offered. "I'd say make yourself at home, but from what I hear you've already made yourself quite comfortable," he finished dryly, one eyebrow raised in amusement. Hermione gulped and nearly began to choke on her own spit. Why am I constantly choking in front of these Malfoy men at the least opportune moments? And just how much has Draco told his parents about our relationship? She followed Lucius into the kitchen, searching for a way to respond to what was surely an innuendo. How embarrassing! Luckily, she was saved by Narcissa, who had been preparing things in the dining room. Hermione, my dear, how lovely for you to join us this evening. She took notice of Hermione's red cheeks and scowled at her husband. You haven't been trying to scare her off, have you, Lucius? She gave Hermione a dainty hug and bumped her cheek in an air kiss before floating a set of covered serving platters from the kitchen counter to the table. It seemed as though Narcissa had brought dinner over from the manor, not to mention that she had set the table as though they would be receiving the Queen. Hermione wondered oddly if this was a regular occurrence in an attempt to bring some culture to Scorpius's life, or if it was all for Hermione's benefit. Either way, Hermione found it rather sweet. I highly doubt Miss Granger would be scared off by the likes of me, but I promise I have made no such effort to do so, Sissa, Lucius said, winking at Hermione as though they were old friends. Hermione found herself at a loss of what to say. Standing around in a Muggle kitchen, casually chatting with the Malfoys was completely surreal, made even more so since she hadn't expected them. After floundering for a few moments, she finally found her tongue. Thank you for having me, Narcissa. I'm sorry that I'm a bit underdressed, but Narcissa waved her apology off. Oh, don't worry about that, dear. I know our arrival must be a surprise. We only just popped by for dinner a few moments ago. Draco wasn't expecting us. Hermione nodded and was about to begin wringing her hands awkwardly when Draco emerged from the garage. Although Hermione had yet to see what Draco got up to in there, she knew it had to be something laborious if the wood shavings, dirt, and sweat that covered him was any indication. His plaid flannel was wrinkled and grimy, the knees of his jeans were stretched out and filthy, and there was a thick layer of dirt on the bottom of his work boots. Whatever it was that he'd been doing, Hermione immediately decided that it should be illegal for any man to look that fucking delicious after doing manual labor. For someone who had grown up as an aristocrat dressed only in the finest clothes that money could buy, Draco Malfoy pulled off blue collar very well. Draco's face lit up when he saw her, and Hermione's anxiety was soothed by his presence. Although it was short-lived, he strode over and planted a sound kiss upon her lips right in front of his parents, and Hermione squawked and flailed her arms at him, giving him a light shove backward. Hey, love. Draco chuckled at her surprise and turned to scrub his hands clean in the sink, hollering for Scorpius to come inside to eat. She tried to shake off her embarrassment the best she could, although it was tough going. Scorpius came charging in moments later with Chico hot on his heels, causing a ruckus as the overgrown jumped from person to person, looking for attention. Hermione was surprised to see that both Malfoys appeared to be dog people and didn't mind in the slightest, so she took a moment to pick Scorpius up and help him wash his hands in the kitchen sink. As they sat down to eat, Hermione wondered how in Merlin's name she was going to make it through the dinner unscathed. It turns out she needn't have worried because by the end of the meal, Hermione felt completely at ease with the elder Malfoys. They clearly doted on Scorpius and were much less stiff and old-fashioned than she had expected. When Scorpius asked if her and Draco were going to have a sleepover again that night, Hermione thought she may just die from mortification. But Draco brushed it aside like it was nothing, and she only had to endure a few poorly concealed innuendos from Lucius before Narcissus stomped on one of his feet underneath the table, reminding him sweetly to mind his manners. A second bottle of wine had been opened by the time the meal was winding down, and the conversation turned to the family's plans for the upcoming week. Mother, I'm going to have to spend a few days in Paris next week for work. Does it work if Scorpius stays at the manor from Tuesday to Thursday? Oh, yes, that'll be splendid. But, Dad, can't I just stay at home with Miney and Chico? Scorpius cut his grandmother off mid-sentence and looked at his dad as though this was the most obvious solution in the world. All the adults sucked in a collective breath and froze, and for the umpteenth time that night, Hermione wished she could just sink into the ground and disappear, while simultaneously melting at the way Scorpius had asked to stay with her. The elder Malfoy stayed silent while Draco looked down at Scorpius and back to Hermione several times, his mouth gaping open. Hermione had never seen him look so lost for words. Well, I guess if it's okay with Hermione. But Hermione held up a hand to stop him, feeling the weight of Narcissus' frown upon her. Chico and I would love to stay here with you, but don't you usually stay with your Nana? I'm sure she would like to have you over at the manor." She smiled encouragingly, trying to smooth things over, but Scorpius was not having it. "But I want to stay here with you," he pouted, sticking out his lower lip and crossing his arms. Draco sighed and intervened. "Scorp, we'll talk about it later, okay?" "No, don't give me that lip, young man. We'll talk about it later. Now I want you to go and give your grandparents a hug and thank them for dinner." Scorpius obeyed begrudgingly, and Hermione stood awkwardly to the side as Draco also said his goodbyes. Lucius came over and gave her a kiss on the cheek, but Narcissa very obviously said nothing to her, ignoring her while they put on their cloaks and stepped through the flue. Hermione began clearing the remaining dishes from the table, while Draco instructed Scorpius to go pick up the toys he'd left out in the living room over the course of the day. Draco helped with the last of the cleanup before coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her middle, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I'm sorry about my mother, love." He sighed deeply. Hermione frowned and just kept washing dishes slowly, a flurry of emotions coursing through her. "I didn't mean to cause any," she began, but Draco just scoffed. "You have nothing to apologize for. My mother is very protective, and I think it caught her off guard to see how close you and Scorpius have obviously become. I'll talk with her and smooth things over. It'll be fine. But she shouldn't have snubbed you like that." Draco shook his head in annoyance. "Were you serious about staying with Scorpius?" Hermione nodded. "Of course. I would love to stay with him for a couple of days while you're gone." She could think of nothing better if she was being honest with herself. Draco placed a soft kiss below her ear and ran his hands along her ribcage and back down to her hips. "He'll be really happy to hear that, my love," he whispered in her ear. She was just turning to meet his lips when he scooped some soap from the sink and swiped the tip of her nose playfully. "Hey!" she cried, her mouth hanging open in shock before scooping her own handful and flinging it at him. "Oh, now you're really going to get it." When Scorpius burst into the kitchen a few minutes later, wondering what was going on, they were both covered in suds, breathless from laughter. Hermione was on the kitchen floor, clutching her side, and Draco was bent over the counter, tears streaming down his face. Scorpius ran to Hermione and flopped down, swiping some of the suds from her hair and flinging them at his dad. "Ha! Gotcha, Dad!" "Oh, you are so gonna get it, Scorp." Scorpius ran screaming up the stairs, and Draco chased after him, leaving Hermione to flop back and catch her breath, overwhelmed with the happiness she found coursing through her. Just as she began to suspect it, it had grown too quiet. Both boys came racing down the stairs, having joined forces against her, and utilized Draco's wand to arm themselves with a volley of bubbles. "Ah!" they cried as they raced towards her, and Hermione scrambled up and out the back door, Chico barking wildly at the commotion. Narcissa's frostiness was long forgotten, at least for the time being. Hermione was right where she belonged, and she wasn't going anywhere any time soon. Not if she could help it. Much later that night, after the carnage from their bubble war had been vanished and Scorpius had been put to bed, Draco built a fire in the hearth and ordered Hermione to wait for him in the living room. Feeling a little mischievous, and still thinking about how sexy Draco had been when he had emerged from the garage, Hermione turned off all the downstairs lights and threw some of the couch pillows onto the rug in front of the fire. She settled on the floor and waited for Draco, who emerged from the stairs a moment later with something behind his back. He dropped to his knees and slid whatever it was under the coffee table, hiding it from view. "What do we have here?" he purred, crawling across her body and trapping her beneath him, running a hand beneath her sweater and up her abdomen, dropping kisses on the hollow of her throat. "Not sure. Maybe another item to check off your list?" she murmured coyly. "What do you have there?" "I got you something," he admitted against her lips. "Oh, yeah? I thought that might be a present." "Close your eyes and I'll show you," he instructed, and she obediently put a hand over her eyes until Draco had thrust something into her lap. He scooched away to give her some space, and Hermione held it in her hands for a moment before opening it. It felt like a book, and it was bound in rich brown leather, but it seemed overly large and didn't have normal book pages. When she opened it and began to turn the blank plastic sleeve, it became quite clear what he had given her. "Draco," she said, staring down at it, lost for words. "It's a portfolio. For your sketches," he said nervously, apparently unsure of how it would be received. Hermione thought of all those sketches she had strung up on the walls weeks ago, all the swirling memories and fears that she had painstakingly purged from her psyche. How freeing it had been to show them to Draco and see them through his eyes. "You don't have to show them to anyone, of course. I just thought you should have a nice place to preserve them." Hermione laid the portfolio aside and lunged towards him, kissing him fiercely and shoving him to the ground. Draco broke away, barking out a laugh. "So you like it, then?" he asked as she peppered him with kisses. "Yes, you idiot," Hermione murmured, slipping his shirt off his shoulders and pushing him back to the ground, straddling his hips as she ran her fingertips along his arms and chest, tracing the artwork on his body that she had come to adore. The raised scarring of the dark mark that he had purposely left uncovered, a reminder of all that he had overcome. The white narcissus that wove up his arm in honor of his mother, and the snake that trailed between the petals that signified his transmutation over the last 10 years. "We shed the skin of our former selves just as a snake does," he told her. She glanced down at his other arm and trailed her fingertips over a snitch, the tree line of the forbidden forest, a compass, a depiction of his wand that wrapped around his bicep like an Ouroboros, and the words Temet Nose, written in bold, beautiful script. And those were just her favorites. There were so many depths of this man that she had yet to explore. Hermione pulled her sweater over her head and undid the clasp of her bra before sinking close, her lips and tongue making their way to his, memorizing the taste and feel of his body beneath her. She slid down to unbuckle his belt, and he watched her movements with heavily lidded eyes, as she undid the snap and tugged them down just enough to free him, taking it in her mouth with a moan of pleasure. She laved her tongue against him for as long as he would allow, and surrendered when he flipped her onto her back, paying her the same attention. The rest of the world fell away as they helped each other out of the remaining clothing, the fire crackling merrily in the hearth. The driving November wind roared outside the protection of the cozy cottage, but was drowned out by the sound of lips against lips and their uninhibited gasps of pleasure. Hermione had her way with Draco. She took him every which way that she wanted him, and reveled in the way he matched her, the way that he fit her just right in every possible way. Rain pounded upon the earth, thunder roared, and lightning up in the sky, but it went unnoticed by the two of them. They were far too busy falling desperately and hopelessly in love with each other to give one whit about the weather. Nature walk through the forest? Check. Morning coffee on Draco's porch? Check. Begin Draco's list? Check. Dish to Ginny about Draco? Check. Put my apartment on the market? Check. Withstand my first snub from Narcissa Malfoy? Check. Soap said war? Check.